The metal bowl slipped from old Ireti's hands and clattered across the dirt floor the exact second Enitan stepped into the hut. She looked up slowly. Her cloudy eyes moved over his face, his suit, his shaking hands. Then she smiled the way people smile at strangers and asked, "My son said he would come home before I died. Did you see him on the road?" Enitan stopped breathing. 10 years. 10 years of work, sacrifice, and longing had led to this one moment, and his own mother did not know him. Before he could answer, Dio appeared in the doorway, went pale, and snapped, "You should leave. She doesn't need visitors digging up the dead." But Enitan was not dead, and something inside that house had murdered the truth. If the person you loved most looked into your face and failed to know, would you walk away or fight to uncover what was stolen from them? Tell me what country you're watching from and your local time right now, and if you love emotional, powerful stories with deep twists and healing endings, subscribe and stay with me for the next part. Enitan did not move at first. The hut seemed to tilt around him. The smell of wood smoke, old fabric, and damp earth pressed against his chest like a hand. The woman standing 3 steps away was his mother. He knew the curve of her shoulders. He knew the small scar near her left temple from the season she had slipped while carrying cassava home in the rain. He knew the shape of her fingers, rough from years of washing, harvesting, mending, surviving. But her eyes held no recognition, only polite confusion. And something worse than confusion. Fear. Not fear of him. Fear of what might happen because he was there. Dio filled the doorway with a bucket in one hand and anger in the other. He was broader than Enitan remembered, heavier around the stomach, with a face that might have looked kind if bitterness had not hardened it. For one flashing second, naked shock crossed his features. Then it was gone, buried under irritation. "You heard me," Dio said. "Leave." Enitan forced himself to breathe. He had built companies in 3 countries. He had negotiated with men who smiled while trying to cut his throat in boardrooms. He had learned how to let silence do part of the work. So he swallowed the cry burning in his chest and lowered his voice until it was almost calm. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "I came because I knew her husband long ago." That was a lie. Not a clean lie, not one he liked. But he understood 2 things instantly. If he spoke his name now, he might frighten his mother, and he might also drive Dio into destroying whatever was already hidden inside this house. Dio's eyes narrowed. "You knew our father Enitan," nodded once. "Years ago. He asked me to check on the family if I ever passed through this region." The excuse hung in the room. Thin. Possible. Useful. Old Ireti looked from one man to the other, her brows knitting with effort. "You knew my husband?" she asked softly. "Yes, Mama," Enitan said, before he could stop himself. The words slipped out raw. Dio noticed. His stare sharpened. But Ireti only flinched at the tenderness in Enitan's voice, as though tenderness itself had become unfamiliar enough to be suspicious. "Well," she said after a moment, "if you knew him, then sit. A visitor should not stand like bad news." Enitan nearly broke at that. Even now, even lost inside whatever had been done to her mind, she was still trying to be gracious. Dio did not want him sitting. That much was obvious, but refusing in front of her would make him look cruel, so he stepped aside with exaggerated reluctance. "There is no food," he muttered. "I did not come to eat." Enitan replied. He sat on a low wooden stool near the wall. The hut was smaller than memory. Or maybe success had made his memories generous. A narrow bed, a crooked table, a woven mat, 1 cooking pot, 2 cracked enamel cups, a faded curtain separating the sleeping corner from a storage area. The roof had been patched with different sheets of tin and old sacks. Light entered in broken strips. This was not poverty that had simply remained poor. This was poverty that had been allowed to rot, and his mother was living in the center of it. Ireti bent slowly to pick up the fallen metal bowl, but Enitan reached it first. Their fingers brushed. She jerked back. "Sorry," she whispered instantly. The apology cut through him like a blade. Sorry. For what? For existing, for being startled, for touching a bowl in her own house. "No," Enitan said gently. "You don't need to apologize." Dio gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "She apologizes for everything. It keeps peace. Keeps peace." The phrase chilled the air more than if he had shouted. Enitan lifted the bowl and placed it on the table. "Does it?" Dio leaned the bucket against the wall. "In this life, peace costs something." Their eyes met. The statement was simple, but it landed with the weight of a threat, not just to Enitan. To her. He looked at Ireti again. She had begun folding and refolding the end of her wrapper, her hands moving in restless little motions. Her shoulders were hunched inward. Every few seconds she glanced at Dio and then away again, like a person listening for a storm. Enitan knew trauma when he saw it. He had seen it in workers rescued from violent sites, in children after riots, in his own face once long ago when grief and hunger had still been his closest companions. Trauma lived in the body first, in the flinch, in the shrinking, in the instinct to apologize before danger even arrived. His mother was carrying it in every breath. He needed information. Now. But not in a way that would blow the room apart. So he let his gaze wander like a polite guest's would. The wall above the bed held a crooked religious calendar from 3 years ago. A nail by the door, a cloth bag, no family photographs in sight. That alone was wrong. Ireti had once treated photographs like living treasure. She used to wipe them with the edge of her wrapper and smile at them when she thought no one was looking. "Have you lived here long alone?" Enitan asked carefully. "She is not alone," Dio answered before Ireti could speak. "I take care of her." Ireti nodded too fast. "Yes, he helps me. He does a lot." But her voice was the voice of someone reciting a lesson. Enitan shifted, and the other son Dio's jaw tightened. Which other son, Ireti asked. The world seemed to stop. Enitan did not show it. Years of discipline saved him. Only his fingers closed once around his own knee. Dio spoke lightly. Too lightly. She gets confused. Some days she remembers old things. Some days she doesn't. I asked because your husband mentioned a boy who left to make something of himself. Enitan said, eyes on Ireti. A strange expression crossed her face then. A flicker. A movement behind the clouds. There was... She frowned. There was... someone who promised. Her voice drifted. Dio cut in. Promises are cheap. Silence followed. Outside, a goat bleated. Somewhere farther off, women were talking on the road, the rhythm of village life continuing as though nothing holy and terrible was happening inside this hut. Enitan stood. May I bring water? No need, Dio said quickly, but Ireti surprised them both. Yes, she said, the pot is nearly empty. Dio's irritation flashed, but he could not object. Not openly. Enitan took the clay container and stepped outside. Heat swallowed him at once. Harsh afternoon sun, red earth, dry grass trembling at the edges of the compound. The old neem tree still stood near the side wall, though one large branch had died. A line of laundry sagged between poles. The house looked even worse from outside. Cracks spread through the mud walls. The roof dipped in one corner. A chicken scratched beneath a broken basin. And then he saw it. The window. Not the window itself, but the bars nailed across the inside frame. They were rough pieces of wood, recent compared to the rest. Too thick to be decorative. too strong to be accidental. His heartbeat changed. Why did a poor old woman need bars on the inside of her window? He moved toward the water drum, forced himself not to stare longer, and filled the pot slowly. As he turned back, he noticed movement across the yard. An elderly woman passing with a bundle of greens slowed when she saw him. Her eyes widened. Recognition. No, not recognition of him, perhaps, but recognition of something unusual. He gave a respectful nod. She hesitated, then nodded back quickly, and kept walking. Yet she looked over her shoulder twice. People were watching this house, not casually, warily. When Enitan returned inside, Ireti was arranging cups. 3 of them now. 1 chipped, 1 cracked, 1 metal. She was preparing tea as if formal hospitality could hold together a life that had been fraying for years. "You don't have to do that," Enitan said. "A guest must be welcomed properly." She answered. Again that soft dignity. Again that pain. Dio sat with one leg bouncing annoyance rippling off him. "You've seen her, now go." "Why such hurry?" Enitan asked. "Because strangers come with trouble." "And sons?" Enitan asked before he could stop himself. Dio went still. Ireti's hand froze above the cups. For one suspended second, something alive burned in her eyes. Not memory exactly. Not yet. But a bruise of memory. A shape pressing from underneath. Then the kettle rattled. She jumped hard enough to spill water on her hand. "Oh, sorry. Enitan crossed the room before thinking. "You're burned." He caught her wrist gently and turned her palm toward the light. The scar there was old, crescent-shaped. His breath lodged in his throat. He had made that scar. He had been 8 years old and wild with fever. He had kicked over a cooking stone, and boiling porridge had splashed. She had covered him with her own hands. She had laughed later and called the scar a mother's tax for raising stubborn sons. He stared at it now, unable to speak. Ireti stared at him too, at his face, his eyes, his hand holding hers. A tremor moved through her. Then Dio rose so abruptly the stool scraped the floor. "Enough." The word snapped the moment in half. Ireti yanked her hand back as though she had done something forbidden. Enitan looked from her frightened face to Dio's hard one, and the truth settled deeper in him, cold and merciless. This house did not smell only of poverty. It smelled of fear, silence, and control. And whatever had happened to his mother had happened here slowly under a roof where everyone in the village had learned not to speak too loudly. Enitan set the cup down untouched. He had come home hoping to reunite with his mother. Now he understood that before he could bring her home, he would have to uncover what had been done to her and who had profited while her mind was being buried alive. He lifted his eyes to Dio and offered the faintest, most dangerous smile. "All right," he said softly. "I'll go for today." Dio relaxed too soon. Because Enitan was not leaving. Not really. Not until the truth inside that house was dragged into the light. Enitan did not go far. He walked past the bend in the dusty road, past the mango tree where boys were throwing stones at green fruit, past 2 women pounding yam beneath a patched awning. Then he stopped beside the abandoned grinding shed near the edge of the village and stood very still, letting the rage burn through his body without showing on his face. He had learned long ago that anger could be fuel or poison. Used well, it sharpened. Used badly, it destroyed the wrong target. Right now, he needed it sharp. Inside the hut, his mother had apologized for being startled in her own home. She had flinched when her hand touched his. She had looked toward Dio before answering simple questions, as though permission had become the first law of her life. And those bars nailed inside the window, those bars would not leave Enitan's mind. He looked back toward the cluster of homes. The village had changed in 10 years, but not completely. The old roads were still old roads. The gossip still moved faster than vehicles. The same currents ruled everything here, family debt, shame, fear, pride, church, market, memory. And memory, he was beginning to understand, had been turned into a weapon. A soft scraping sound interrupted his thoughts. Someone was approaching through the dry grass behind the shed. Enitan turned. It was the elderly woman he had seen near the compound earlier. Up close, she was smaller than she had seemed from afar, wrapped in a faded blue cloth, with a basket of greens balanced against one hip. Her face was lined deeply, but her eyes were alive, sharp, frightened, searching. She stopped 2 arms' lengths away. "You are not who you said you were," she murmured. Enitan said nothing. The old woman studied him another second, then shook her head slowly. "No stranger looks at a mother like that." His throat tightened. "And who are you?" "People call me Mama Bisi." He had heard the name in passing as a boy. A widow. A watcher. The kind of woman men dismissed until they realized she had seen everything. "Did she tell you?" Enitan asked quietly. Mama Bisi's expression softened. "She did not need to. Your mother used to hold your school photograph like it was a passport to heaven." Her gaze dropped. Then one day, it disappeared. The words landed heavily. Enitan stepped closer. "You know who I am. I know who you were," Mama Bisi said. "The village has been told many things since then." He drew a slow breath. "Tell me the truth." The old woman looked back toward the village road. No one was close, but still she lowered her voice. "The truth is dangerous in a house where hunger and envy have slept in the same bed for too many years. That is not an answer. It is the beginning of one." She shifted the basket in her arms. "After your father died, your mother broke in a way she tried not to show. Dio was still young then, but not too young to notice weakness. At first he seemed helpful. He carried the farming work. He fetched medicine. He spoke gently. Everyone praised him. Enitan felt cold already. The pattern was too familiar. Then he asked. Then the money started arriving. His jaw clenched. Mama Bisi nodded once, seeing the confirmation in his face. "Yes. Money. At first not much, then more. Some months people saw the postman come, sometimes a driver from town, sometimes envelopes, sometimes parcels. But your mother stayed poor. Too poor. The kind of poor that makes neighbors whisper arithmetic to each other." Enitan swallowed hard. "Did no one ask?" "We did. Dio always had a reason." Her mouth tightened. "Hospital bills. Old debt. Your mother wants privacy." The money was less than people think. Lies come dressed according to the audience. He knew which ones would fit. Enitan turned away for a moment. His chest rose and fell, once controlled. All those years, every transfer, every letter written late at night after meetings and flights and victories that had meant nothing because the one person he had wanted to protect had never touched any of it. "Why did no one tell me?" he asked. Mama Bisi's silence answered first. "Then, where would we tell you Dio said you had changed numbers, changed country, changed name, that you were ashamed of the village and did not want to be found?" A bitter laugh almost escaped Enitan, but it died in his throat. Ashamed. He had built his entire life on the promise that one day he would return strong enough to lift his mother out of every humiliation they had ever known. He told people, "I abandoned her." He told people many things. Mama Bisi hesitated, and after some years it became easier for them to believe what hurt less. That sentence hurt because it was true. People often preferred a story that excused their silence. Enitan looked back toward his mother's compound. What happened to her memory? Mama Bisi's eyes darkened. That part did not happen all at once. He waited. At first she was clear, the old woman said. Too clear. She asked questions. She kept count. She knew your father had left little, so she wondered why food still vanished. She asked about money, about letters, about why Dio never let her go alone to collect anything from town. And what did he do? He made her doubt herself. Enitan's stomach tightened. Small things first, Mama Bisi continued. Moving objects, hiding paper, telling her she had forgotten conversations she never had. Then he began controlling who saw her. If someone came asking about transfers or deliveries, he answered before she could. If she insisted he would wait until they were alone and speak to her in that soft, poisonous way some men use when they want to sound like caretakers while tightening a rope. Enitan could see it, too easily. He told her she was confused, Mama Bisi said. He told her grief was making her imagine things. He told her she was getting old and should be grateful he was there to manage what she could no longer manage. Enitan closed his eyes briefly. Gaslighting. Isolation. Dependency. Shame. The architecture of slow destruction. But that alone wouldn't make her forget me, he said. No, Mama Bisi replied. Not alone. The wind shifted. A goat cried from somewhere uphill. The village seemed absurdly ordinary around this conversation. Enitan opened his eyes. What else? Mama Bisi set her basket down on a stone. 3 years after your father died, she said your mother fell sick during the rainy season. Fever, weakness. She recovered, but after that she was never the same. Dio took over all her medicine. He said the clinic prescribed tablets to calm her nerves and help her sleep. Some days she moved like her bones were full of sand. Some days she would wake late and stare as if the morning had arrived in the wrong house. A pulse of dread moved through him. Do you know what he was giving her? No. But I know this whenever she began speaking too clearly, whenever she asked again about your letters or insisted on going to town herself, she would become tired again by the next day. Enitan's hands curled into fists. Mama Bisi saw and stepped closer. Listen to me. Rage is easy. Proof is harder. He exhaled slowly. She was right. Did my mother ever see anything from me? He asked after a moment. Mama Bisi looked down, then back up. Once? His head snapped toward her. Only once. Only once that I know of. The old woman glanced around again, then reached into the fold of her wrapper. From within it, she pulled a small object wrapped in an old handkerchief. She held it like something sacred and cursed at the same time. Enitan stared. What is that? Not here, she whispered. Come. She led him behind the grinding shed to a narrow strip of shade cast by a broken wall. There she unfolded the handkerchief. Inside lay a photograph. Enitan forgot to breathe. It was an old family picture taken the year before he left the village. His father stood stiffly in his Sunday shirt, trying and failing not to look proud. Little Dio still round-faced, then leaned against Ireti's side. And Enitan himself, thin, fierce-eyed, determined, stood at the edge, one hand on his mother's shoulder. Except the photograph had been cut. Not cleanly, not neatly. His own figure had been hacked out with jagged scissors, leaving a rough white emptiness beside Ireti. He stared at the hole where his body had once been. Something inside him went silent. I found it near the cooking pit one morning years ago, Mama Bisi said softly, burned at the edges. I hid it. Enitan took the photograph with trembling fingers. The paper was brittle, smoke-stained. On the back in his father's handwriting were the words, Our family before the first harvest rains. His family. Before someone had begun amputating him from it. She kept your photographs in a tin box, Mama Bisi said. Then, one by one, they disappeared. Dio told her rats ruined them. Later, he told her she had lost them herself. Enitan kept staring at the hole in the picture. This was bigger than theft. Bigger than money. Dio had not only stolen envelopes and land and medicine and dignity. He had been cutting Enitan out of the house itself, out of the story, out of the memory. piece by piece until even the walls no longer admitted he had existed there. "Did she fight him?" Enitan asked, his voice barely audible at first. Mama Bisi's answer came without hesitation. "Your mother is gentle, but she was never weak. Not truly," she argued. She accused him. She searched his room. Once she came to my door in the dark, shaking, saying she knew he was hiding letters from her, but she had no proof in her hands, only fear in her chest. And fear is a poor witness when the whole village wants quiet. Enitan lowered the photograph. "Why are you telling me this now?" The old woman's face folded with sorrow. "Because you came back." He looked at her. "No," she said. "Listen, not because you came back rich, not because you came back angry. Because when you looked at her inside that hut, you looked like a son who still wanted his mother more than he wanted revenge." The words struck deeper than she knew. Mama Bisi bent, picked up her basket, then added in a low voice, "There is more in that house. Your letters. Maybe some money records, too. He keeps things he thinks prove his cleverness. Evil people often do." Enitan nodded slowly. The sun was lowering now, staining the road bronze. Children's voices drifted from somewhere near the well. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Evening was coming. He slipped the mutilated photograph inside his jacket like a wound he needed close. Then he looked back toward the hut where his mother waited inside a life built from lies. He had returned hoping to be recognized. Instead, he had found evidence that someone had spent 10 years erasing him from her world. And now the grief inside him was changing shape. It was becoming method. By the time darkness settled over the village, Enitan had already made 3 decisions. First, he would not confront Dio recklessly again. Not yet. Rage would only warn the man and send evidence disappearing into the night. Second, he would not leave his mother alone for long, not after what Mama Bisi had revealed. And third, he would stop thinking like a wounded son for a few hours, and start thinking like the man who had built an empire by studying weakness without showing his hand. So he rented the back room of a widow's small cement house near the road leading to the market. It was barely larger than a storage shed, with 1 bed, 1 lantern, and a window that refused to close fully. But it gave him something he needed more than comfort. It gave him a reason to remain in the village without sleeping under Dio's eyes. Before dawn the next morning, Enitan woke to the cry of roosters and the dry ache of unfinished grief. For a moment, half awake, he thought he was 17 again and late for farm work. Then memory struck hard. The hut, his mother's empty gaze, the mutilated photograph now folded inside his jacket. He sat up, washed quickly, and stepped into the cool, grey morning. The village was gentler at sunrise. Women swept compounds with long grass brooms. Smoke climbed softly from cooking fires. Barefoot children chased each other through dust not yet heated by noon. Somewhere a radio played a hymn with too much static. Everything looked ordinary. That was what made cruelty so difficult to expose. It learned how to survive inside ordinary mornings. Enitan reached his mother's compound just as Dio was hauling a sack of feed toward the side yard. The younger man stopped when he saw him, irritation flashing across his face. "You again." Enitan gave a mild shrug. "Your mother invited me to tea yesterday." Dio's mouth tightened. "Old women say many things." Still, Enitan said lightly, "Hospitality deserves respect." That answer forced Dio to either deny his mother's word openly or tolerate him. For a second, Enitan saw the calculation. Then Dio jerked his chin toward the house. "Don't stay long." Inside, Ireti was seated on a low stool near the hearth, staring into a pot, though nothing was cooking in it. Morning light filtered through the patched roof, striping her wrapper with pale gold. She looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, but not empty. Never empty. Enitan was starting to understand that her mind was not gone, so much as buried under layers of fear, confusion, and exhaustion. When she heard his footsteps, she turned. For one suspended instant, something brightened in her face. It disappeared so fast he might have imagined it. "You came back," she said. The words struck him harder than if she had called his name. "Yes," he answered gently. "I said I would." Ireti frowned as if those words touched something old inside her. "Did you Enitan knelt to bring himself closer to her eye level?" "I try not to make promises I cannot keep." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she gave a faint nod and returned her attention to the cold pot. Dio entered behind him and dropped 2 cassava tubers onto the table with more force than necessary. "If you want to be useful, fetch water." Enitan turned to him calmly. "Of course." He carried the clay pot outside, but this time he moved slower, giving himself time to watch. The compound was poor, yes, but disorder inside it was selective. The broken fence had been repaired in one section near the back room. The chicken coop, though shabby, had a new latch. A rusted motorbike under a tarp had better tires than most men in the village could afford. And hanging from a nail near the side window was a ring of keys. Not many, just 3. Yet Enitan noticed Dio glance toward them twice in less than a minute. Important. When he returned with the water, Ireti was rubbing her temple as though fighting a headache. "Are you in pain?" he asked. "It passes," she murmured. "Does it happen often?" Dio answered from across the room. "Some days. The clinic gave her tablets. They keep her calm." Enitan looked at him. "What clinic?" "The government one." "Which doctor?" Dio's eyes sharpened. "Why, because if the medicine makes her this tired, perhaps the dosage is wrong. She is alive, isn't she?" Dio snapped. The room went still. Ireti immediately lowered her head. "Don't argue," she whispered. "Please, don't argue." There it was again. That desperate instinct to stop conflict before it reached her skin. Enitan let the silence stretch just enough to make Dio feel watched, then softened his tone. "No argument. I only asked." He spent the next hour making himself small, helpful, unthreatening. He split firewood, repaired a loose stool leg, carried a sack of maize meal from the side shed. With every task he learned a little more. Dio hovered. Not constantly. That would have been too obvious. But enough. Enough to show possession. Enough to show that strangers were not meant to move freely here. Then, around mid-morning, opportunity arrived wearing a red headscarf and carrying gossip. A woman from farther down the road stopped by to borrow salt. She was the kind who could not enter a compound without also entering the story inside it. Her name, Enitan later gathered, was Sade. She saw him blinked and smiled the cautious smile people give when curiosity beats manners. "Visitor," she asked Ireti. "An old acquaintance," Dio said quickly. Sade's gaze slid to Enitan's suit, his polished shoes now dusted by village roads, his wristwatch he had deliberately left visible. Her eyebrows rose. "A successful acquaintance." Enitan smiled politely. "I've done all right?" Sade drew out the sound. Then perhaps God remembered one house from this village after all. Dio's shoulders stiffened. Sade noticed. Of course she noticed. Women like her survived by noticing everything. She took the salt from Ireti, but before leaving she touched the older woman's arm. "Mama, are you coming to prayer gathering this evening?" Ireti's fingers twitched. "If I can." Dio cut in. "She is too tired." Sade looked from him to Ireti, then back again. "That is what you always say." It was mild, almost playful. But Enitan caught the small reaction in Dio's face. Resentment, alarm, control challenged, however gently. After Sade left, Dio banged utensils around longer than necessary. Enitan pretended not to notice. Instead, he turned toward the curtained storage corner and asked casually, "May I place the maize meal there?" "No," Dio said too fast. "Leave it." Enitan looked at the curtain. old cloth, faded floral pattern. A cheap thing. But the space behind it mattered. He could feel it the way a hunter feels movement in bushgrass he cannot yet see. Ireti had gone quiet again. Her gaze rested on the floor near Enitan's shoes. Then very softly she said, "Your shoes." He looked down. "What about them?" She frowned in concentration. There was a boy who said one day he would wear city shoes and come back laughing at our dust. Enitan stopped breathing for a second. Dio spun toward her. "You are confused." But Ireti kept looking at the shoes, not at Dio. He used to run too much. His feet always broke his sandals. Her voice was distant now, wandering through corridors of memory. I told him. Her eyes clouded. She pressed her fingers to her head. No, it is gone." Enitan crouched beside her before he could think better of it. "What did you tell him?" She looked at him helplessly, as if ashamed for losing something precious, halfway through reaching for it. "I don't know," she whispered. Dio stepped forward. "Enough." Enitan rose slowly. She was remembering. She was tiring herself. She was remembering Enitan repeated. For the first time, a flicker of something raw broke through Dio's practiced irritation. Not just annoyance. Fear of memory. It vanished quickly, but Enitan had seen it, and once seen it changed everything. He decided to push carefully. "You've done a lot for her, I'm sure," Enitan said. Voice suddenly cordial. "Not many men would remain here sacrificing opportunities, carrying burdens alone." Dio was suspicious of praise. Smart enough to be. "What are you trying to say?" "Only that people may judge what they do not understand." Enitan leaned against the table as if settling into conversation. "I know what it means to hold responsibility while others disappear." The sentence was bait. Dio heard it. His jaw shifted. "Yes," he said after a pause. "You do." There. Not a confession, but a crack. Enitan kept his tone easy. "Sometimes the absent ones return and want to act like heroes." Dio gave a humorless smile. "Exactly. And the ones who stayed are expected to explain every grain of rice, every debt, every hard choice." Dio's eyes narrowed with a kind of bitter relief. He wanted to be understood. Even abusers did. Especially abusers. Their favorite lie was that necessity had forced their hand. "You understand more than I thought," he said. Enitan let a small silence open. Then he asked, did he ever write back? The question landed cleanly. Too cleanly. Dio answered before caution could save him. Once. Then stopped. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew. Because no one in this room, no one had said who he was. Ireti looked up confused. Enitan straightened slowly. So there was writing. Dio's face hardened at once. I mean before. Years ago. Before her mind worsened. But yesterday you said there was no point talking about promises. Enitan's voice stayed calm. Today you say there were letters once. Dio took a step forward. Watch yourself. The room shrank. Ireti's hands began trembling again. Please don't fight. Enitan lifted both palms, slightly a gesture of peace for her sake, though his eyes never left Dio's. He had what he needed for now. Not proof, not yet, but confirmation. Dio knew more than he admitted. Much more. And worst of all, he was tired. Tired people made mistakes. Tired liars contradicted themselves. Tired controllers got careless when they believed themselves morally justified. Enitan lowered his gaze first, pretending retreat. You're right, he said. This is not my business. Dio relaxed a fraction. A fatal fraction. Because Enitan now understood the truth hiding beneath the younger man's mask, Dio had not merely stolen. He had built an identity around being the necessary son, the suffering son, the one who stayed. And any returning truth, any memory of Enitan, threatened that entire structure. Which meant one thing. Dio would protect the lie not only with excuses but with desperation. And desperate men always left fingerprints. Enitan did not return to his rented room that afternoon. Instead, he stayed close enough to the compound to watch without being seen too easily. Moving between the shade of the neem tree, the narrow path behind the grinding shed, and the half-collapsed wall near Mama Bisi's garden. He had learned something important inside the hut. Dio was beginning to lose control of his own story. The contradiction about letters had not been small. It had slipped out because somewhere beneath all his lies, he had started believing his version of events more than the facts. That made him dangerous, but it also made him careless. Near sunset, Enitan saw the first opening. Dio left the compound on the rusted motorbike, one hand holding a small black plastic bag against his chest. He rode fast toward the main road leading to the town clinic. Enitan watched the dust trail disappear, then counted to 50 in his head. 1, 2, 3. He had no certainty about how long Dio would be gone, but he knew 3 things. The man was secretive, protective of the storage corner, and unnaturally defensive about Ireti's medicine. If the answers were anywhere, they were either in the house or wherever Dio had just gone. Enitan chose both. First, the house. He crossed the yard quickly and knocked only once before stepping in. Ireti was seated on the low stool again, one elbow on her knee, her fingers pressed to her temple. She looked up, startled, then visibly relaxed when she recognized him. "You came back," she said. The words still cut him every time, not because she failed to know him, but because some buried part of her clearly knew he was someone who returned. "Yes," Enitan said gently. "I only came to check on you. Is Dio home?" She shook her head. "He went for tablets." "Tablets for you, I think so." She frowned. "Sometimes he says they help me sleep. Sometimes he says they stop the shaking." "And do they?" Her gaze drifted toward the pot on the floor. "They make the world quieter." The answer chilled him. That was not how an older woman described blood pressure medicine or pain relief. That was how someone described sedation. He crouched in front of her. "Mama Ireti, would you come with me for a short drive, just to see a doctor in town? Only to ask questions?" At once, fear entered her face. "No," she whispered. "He will be angry. Only if we do something wrong," Enitan said softly. She looked at him with a strange, almost childlike sorrow. "In this house, anger comes before wrong." The sentence landed like a stone in water. Enitan lowered his voice further. "Then let me carry the wrong." She stared at him. Behind the confusion in her eyes, something moved. Not recognition. Not yet. But trust. Fragile, frightened, irrational trust. The kind that survives even when memory fails. "Will you bring me back?" she asked. His throat tightened. "Yes." That at least would not be a lie. He helped her to her feet. She was lighter than she should have been. Too light. Her wrist beneath his fingers felt like bundled sticks wrapped in skin. He guided her out through the back keeping to the narrow footpath that led toward the road, where he had hired a driver from a neighboring village that morning, just in case he needed one quickly. By the time they reached the waiting car, Ireti was breathing hard. "Sorry," she murmured automatically. Enitan shut his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened the rear door and helped her inside. "No more apologizing," he said quietly. She gave him a confused look, as if he had asked her to stop speaking an entire language. The drive to the private clinic in town took 30 minutes, long enough for Ireti to drift in and out of a thin, uneasy silence. Twice she asked whether they were going far. Once she asked if the rain would start before they returned, though the sky was clear. And once, just once, She looked out the window and said under her breath, "He used to love road trips." Enitan turned sharply. Who did? But the moment had gone. She only rubbed her hands together and stared ahead. The clinic was small but clean, tucked behind a pharmacy and painted in fading cream. Enitan had called ahead through one of his local business contacts and arranged for the most discreet physician available, Dr. Amina Okafor, a middle-aged doctor known in the region for treating elderly patients with patience instead of dismissal. When Dr. Amina entered the consultation room, she took in everything quickly. Ireti's weight loss, her slowed movements, the careful way Enitan positioned himself protectively without crowding her, the urgency in his face. "You may wait outside if the patient prefers privacy," the doctor said. Ireti startled at that, then reached for Enitan's sleeve with a sudden frightened grip. "Stay." The single word almost undid him. "I'll stay," he said. Dr. Amina began gently. Questions about sleep, appetite, headaches, dizziness, forgetfulness. About how often she took medicine and who gave it to her. About whether she had fallen recently. Whether she ever felt confused only at certain times of day. Whether she had periods of unusual sleepiness. At first, Ireti answered in broken fragments. Then, slowly, a pattern emerged. Yes, she was often drowsy after certain tablets. Yes, the tablets came from Dio. No, she did not always know their names. Yes, sometimes they made her limbs heavy and her thoughts slow. Yes, there were days she woke feeling as though part of her mind had been wrapped in cloth. No, she had never been told clearly what illness she had besides age and stress. Dr. Amina's face grew still in the way professional faces do when alarm is being carefully hidden. She asked to examine the medicines. Enitan placed the black plastic sachet he had quietly taken from the shelf by the bed before leaving the hut onto the desk. Dr. Amina opened it and began sorting through blister packs and loose packets. Her frown deepened. "These are not prescribed together responsibly," she said. Enitan's pulse jumped. Meaning, she separated the tablets into groups. One is a strong sedative. This one in an elderly and undernourished patient can cause heavy drowsiness, confusion, impaired memory, and instability. Another is an anti-anxiety medication that should not be used this loosely without supervision. This one appears to be for PN, but the dosage is inconsistent. And this, she lifted a strip with visible irritation, is an antipsychotic often misused to quiet agitation. In someone frail, it can blunt cognition significantly. The room seemed to narrow around Enitan. "You're saying these drugs could make her seem mentally gone, even if she isn't?" "I am saying," Dr. Amina replied carefully, "that these medications combined with malnutrition, emotional distress, isolation, and possibly untreated depression or trauma could absolutely worsen confusion and memory problems." "Worsen," he repeated. "Not cause from nothing, no. But in vulnerable patients the effect can be devastating." She looked directly at him now, especially if the person administering them is not following a proper medical plan. Enitan leaned forward. "Do you think she has dementia?" Dr. Amina did not answer immediately. She turned to Ireti instead. "Mama, do you know today's month?" Ireti hesitated, then guessed wrong. "Do you know where you are?" "In town," she said slowly. "Do you know who brought you here?" Ireti looked at Enitan. For a terrible second he thought she might say a visitor. Instead she whispered, "Someone kind." The doctor made a note, then asked a few more orientation questions, a few short memory tasks, a few emotional prompts. When she finished, she sat back. "I cannot diagnose definitive dementia from one visit," she said. "What I can say is this: I see cognitive impairment, yes, but I also see signs of trauma, fear conditioning. Poor nutrition, probable medication, misuse, and learned helplessness. Some of her confusion may be structural and age-related. Some of it may be from prolonged psychological stress. and some of it appears very likely to be chemically worsened. Enitan's eyes burned. Can she recover? Dr. Amina chose her words with care. Recover fully. I don't know. Improve. Yes, I believe so. If she is removed from the environment that is frightening her, properly, nourished, medically supervised, and no longer sedated inappropriately, I would expect at least partial improvement. Possibly significant improvement. He looked at his mother. She was watching them both, anxiety making her fingers twist in her lap, like a child at the edge of adult weather. Why do people keep talking around me? She asked softly. Am I very bad? The question split him open. No, Enitan said immediately, turning to her. No, Mama. Never. Dr. Amina's eyes flicked to him at the word Mama, but she said nothing. Instead, she spoke gently to Ireti. You are not bad. You are tired, underfed, frightened, and over-medicated. Ireti blinked. Over? Too many tablets, the doctor simplified. Too many tablets can make thoughts heavy. Ireti sat very still. Then she said something so quietly that Enitan almost missed it. I thought heaven was coming early. Silence flooded the room. The doctor's pen stopped moving. Enitan stared at his mother, unable to breathe for a moment, because there it was, the hidden horror beneath the sedation. She had not experienced those drugged, fogged-out days as treatment. She had experienced them as the slow approach of death. Dr. Amina recovered first. Heaven is not coming today, she said with calm firmness. Today we are helping your body. Ireti gave a tiny nod, but tears had gathered in her cloudy eyes. Enitan stood abruptly and turned away, one hand braced against the wall. He had thought he was prepared to hear ugly truths. He had not been prepared for that. Not for the image of his mother drifting through medicated darkness, believing death was arriving because the people around her had made life feel impossible to trust. He heard the scrape of the doctor's chair behind him. When he turned back, Dr. Amina held out a written note and a referral slip. These are my findings from today. Keep them safe, and do not return her to anyone administering these drugs without immediate review. He took the papers with a shaking hand. Doctor, he said, voice low and rough if someone has been doing this knowingly. Her expression hardened. Then it is abuse. The word hit with brutal clarity. Not neglect, not misunderstanding, not village ignorance, abuse. Enitan looked from the doctor's report to his mother's thin hands still trembling in her lap. Something changed inside him then. Until now, grief had led him. Shock had led him. Even hope had led him. But in that room with the truth spelled out in clinical ink and his mother sitting like a silenced witness to her own slow erasure grief was no longer enough. This required war. Not wild war. Precise war. He knelt before Ireti again, gently covering her hands with his. I'm taking you home for now, he said softly. But not back into darkness. Do you understand? She looked at him as if trying to see through water. Then, in a voice almost too faint to hear, she asked, Will you come back tomorrow too? Tears pressed hard behind his eyes. Yes, he said. And this time the promise carried teeth. Enitan did not sleep that night. He sat on the narrow bed in the rented back room, with Dr. Amina's report spread open beside the mutilated family photograph and a page of notes he had written by hand under lantern light. Every fact had to be separated from emotion. Every accusation had to be tied to something concrete. If he moved too early, Dio would deny everything. If he moved too late, evidence would vanish and his mother would continue to live one sedated day away from being erased completely. So Enitan built his plan the way he had built companies during hostile takeovers. Quietly. Methodically. With exits closed before the first visible move. By dawn he had decided where the confrontation would happen. Not inside the hut, not in the clinic, not in private. In the open. At the village market. Because markets did more than sell goods in places like this. Markets judged. Markets remembered. Markets turned rumor into public truth. A lie could survive in a house for years. It struggled to survive under 100 watchful eyes. He began with witnesses. Before the market reached full noise, Enitan visited Mama Bisi. She listened without interruption as he explained the clinic findings in careful terms. Over-medication, trauma, malnutrition, abuse. Her old face tightened, but not with surprise. "I feared as much," she said. "Fear won't be enough today." Enitan replied. "I need what you know, and I need you to say it where people can hear." She looked at him for a long second. "Once I speak, there is no walking back into silence." Enitan nodded. "That is why I came first to you." Mama Bisi straightened her wrapper. "Then I will speak." From there he went to Sade. The woman with the red headscarf, who had challenged Dio without meaning to the day before. He found her arranging dried pepper on a mat near her compound. "I need a favor," he said. She squinted at him. "That depends how expensive truth has become today." Despite everything, a faint smile touched his mouth. "It will cost you gossip." Her eyes lit with ruthless interest. "Then perhaps I am already rich." He told her only enough to sharpen her attention. Not the full story, just enough to make sure she stayed close when voices rose. Then he found the young post-runner who now handled deliveries when the old postman was ill. The boy, barely 17, remembered seeing envelopes for Iretti's household over the years. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to prove the pattern of mail had existed. Finally, Enitan spoke with the market chairman, an older man named Baba Tunde, whose loyalty was less to individuals than to the village's public order. Enitan did not yet reveal his name. He revealed documents instead, bank transfer records on his phone, printed copies his office had couriered to town months before for unrelated property business. And Dr. Amina's note, written that very day. Baba Tunde's face changed as he read. "This is serious," the old man said. "It becomes more serious if hidden Enitan answered." By noon the market was alive. Women called prices over heaps of tomatoes and onions. Men argued over yam weight and transport fees. Children darted between stalls carrying metal basins larger than their torsos. The smell of pepper dust, fish, sweat, and wood smoke rose in waves beneath the punishing sun. This was where reputations were born and buried. Enitan stood near the center lane in a simple dark shirt-sleeves rolled expensive watch hidden under fabric. He wanted no distraction from the substance of the moment. Beside him stood Mama Bisi, straight-backed despite her age. On his other side, Baba Tunde waited with the authority of office and annoyance. He did not like disorder, but he disliked scandal against the village more. Dio arrived almost by accident, or perhaps not by accident. Men like him always came where they believed they still controlled the story. He was carrying a sack of grain over one shoulder when he saw the cluster of faces and slowed. Then he saw Enitan, then Baba Tunde, then Mama Bisi. Something hard flashed through his eyes. "What is this?" he demanded. Baba Tunde lifted a hand. "A question." Dio gave a brittle laugh. "Then ask it." Enitan stepped forward. "You told people for years that my mother received little help from outside," he said. Dio's gaze sharpened at once. "Your mother." Several nearby heads turned. Enitan continued before the line could sink deeper. "You told people she was confused, forgetful, unable to manage money, unable to understand letters. You told them you sacrificed everything to care for her. Today I am asking what happened to the money and correspondence sent in her name over the years." Dio shifted the grain sack down from his shoulder. "Who are you to ask a man with records?" He held up the printed transfer sheets. People moved closer. Dio's face stayed carefully blank. Papers can be forged. Then let us begin with smaller things, Enitan said. Did mail come to your house in her name, no? The answer came too fast. The young post-runner who had been hovering near a cassava stall swallowed hard, and then raised one hand. It did, he said. Not always through me, but sometimes. I delivered two myself. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dio rounded on him. Boy, mind your tongue. Babatunde spoke sharply. He will mind truth. Enitan did not let the silence settle. And money transfers. Dio crossed his arms. If any money came, it went to food, medicine, debt repairs. Do you know what it costs to keep an old woman alive in this economy? That line worked on some faces. Enitan saw it. Sympathy. Familiarity. The village understood burden. Understood invisible labor. Understood sons who stayed while others left. He had expected that. So he gave them the next cut. Then why, he asked quietly, is she still underfed, over-medicated, and living in a collapsing hut while you ride a motorbike better maintained than half the transport men in this market? A few people turned to look at the motorbike parked near the shade. Dio's nostrils flared. You speak like a city fool. A machine is not wealth. No, Enitan said. But hidden keys, selective repairs, and debt taken in your mother's name begin to resemble it. The murmurs grew louder. Dio stepped forward. Watch yourself. Did you sell any family land? Enitan asked. No. Mama Bisi spoke before Enitan could. Yes, he did. The market stilled in a new way when an old woman used that tone. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Dio spun toward her. You old liar! I watched the surveyor walk that boundary myself, Mama Bisi cut in. And I watched your mother ask why strangers were measuring her late husband's soil. More heads turned, more whispers, names exchanged, dates remembered aloud. This was how truth spread in a village, not by one explosive claim, but by hidden memories suddenly finding each other. Enitan reached into his folder and produced photocopies of 2 signed loan agreements his legal staff had retrieved overnight from the district registry. After he called in favors through local government channels, they bore Ireti's name. Babatunde examined them first, then looked up darkly. These thumbprints were taken in her name for debt. Dio's jaw clenched. I borrowed for the household. For the household, Enitan asked. Or for yourself? For survival? The shout broke from him so violently that several people flinched. And there it was, the first true crack. Not innocence. Entitlement. He pointed at the crowd with a shaking finger. All of you stand here judging. Where were you when there was no money? Where were you when she cried at night? Where were you when I had to carry everything alone? He left. Whoever he is, he left. I stayed. A murmur of discomfort moved through the villagers, because that accusation at least contained something emotionally dangerous, the language of sacrifice. Enitan knew he had to cut through it cleanly, so he reached for the largest piece. My mother was examined yesterday by a physician, he said. Dio froze. Enitan unfolded Dr. Amina's report and handed it to Babatunde, who read the key lines aloud in a voice that carried across the market, elderly female. Evidence of cognitive impairment worsened by probable medication misuse, malnutrition, psychological stress, and fear conditioning. Current drug combination unsafe without supervision. Further review urgently recommended. The market erupted. Not loudly at first. A sharp intake of breath here, a curse there, then full outrage gathering like wind. Dio lunged toward the paper. That means nothing. She needed calming. She was unstable. Unstable. Enitan repeated, his voice suddenly cold as iron. Or inconvenient. Dio stared at him. And Enitan saw it, the calculation, the desperation, the shrinking exits. so he made the next move. Why was her window barred from the inside, he asked. The question landed like a blow. Dio did not answer immediately. Too long. Much too long. Then she wondered. Mama Bisi made a sound of disgust. A lie. She stopped wondering after you frightened her into believing the world outside would swallow her. Sade from the edge of the crowd spoke up without invitation. And every prayer gathering you said she was too tired. Every time. Another woman added, You told us she could not stand. A man near the yam stall said, Yet I saw her carrying firewood last month. The market had turned. This was the dangerous part. Not because Dio might win, because cornered shame could become violent. Enitan saw his right hand twitch once near his pocket. He stepped closer before Dio could think himself brave. Enough, Enitan said. Not loud. Worse than loud. The kind of voice men used when the next words might ruin lives. Dio swallowed, and Enitan finally stripped away the last mask. You told my mother I was dead, he said. Dio's face lost color. You told her I abandoned her. Silence crashed down. You intercepted my letters, my money, my voice. You cut me out of photographs. You drugged her until she doubted her own mind. And then you built your righteousness on the ruins. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dio's eyes widened not only because of the accusations, but because of what they revealed. Not just what Enitan knew, who Enitan was. Babatunde turned slowly toward him. You, Enitan, did not look away from Dio. Yes, he said. I am Enitan. The name moved through the market like fire on dry grass. People stared. At the suit that now made sense, the face older but familiar, the eyes Ireti had once searched for in every road. Dio stumbled back one step, and then with the reflex of a drowning man, he threw his final poison into the air. She rejected you herself, he shouted. She wanted you gone. She believed you sold your blood for money and forgot us all. Ask her. Ask her if she ever called your name. The crowd convulsed again. Shock. Doubt. Hunger for the next turn. It was a brutal move, a clever one, because it aimed not at Enitan's evidence, but at his deepest wound. For the first time that day, pain visibly crossed Enitan's face. Just once, just enough for the crowd to feel it. Then he lifted his chin. All right, he said quietly. His voice did not shake. Then we will ask her. The market did not recover after Dio's last shout. It seemed to hold its breath instead. Even the bargaining sounds from the far end of the lane thinned, as if the entire place had leaned inward to hear what would happen next. Enitan stood in the center of that tension, with Dr. Amina's report in one hand, and 10 years of restrained grief pressing against his ribs. Dio's words had done exactly what they were meant to do. Reopen the oldest wound. She rejected you herself. It was cruel because it was possible enough to hurt. Any son who had spent years away carried that fear somewhere. That maybe absence had hardened into abandonment. That maybe the person he loved most had needed him one night too many, and after waiting past dignity, had given up. Dio had chosen the blade well. But Enitan knew something now that he had not known when he first stepped into the hut. Fear had been planted in that house. Confusion had been watered. Memory had been tampered with. Nothing his mother said under those conditions could be accepted without asking how the words had been shaped before they reached her mouth. Babatunde was the first to speak. If the mother is to be questioned, he said heavily, it will not be done here in the market like she is a goat for inspection. A murmur of agreement followed. Enitan nodded once. I agree. Dio tried to seize the shift. Then this is finished. No, Enitan said, turning to him. It is only moving. That sentence unsettled Dio more than anger would have. Enitan could see it. Men like Dio knew how to fight rage. They were less comfortable against patience. Babatunde lifted his staff. This matter will continue at the compound. A few elders only. No crowd pushing into the woman's face. We will hear what can be heard, and see what must be seen. Sade immediately looked disappointed at being excluded. Mama Bisi did not. The smaller group that followed Babatunde down the road consisted of exactly the people Enitan would have chosen if the decision had been his Babatunde himself. Mama Bisi, the young post-runner, 2 older women respected for keeping village memory, and 1 church deacon known for fearing God more than gossip. Dio hated the selection instantly. Too many people old enough to remember details, too many people difficult to bully, too many witnesses. As they approached the compound, Enitan's pulse changed. Not from fear of Dio, from fear of his mother. If Dio's lie had been repeated long enough, if medication and manipulation had distorted her mind deeply enough, she might say anything. She might deny him. She might panic. She might turn his worst nightmare into public sound. And yet the truth had to move forward. When they entered the yard, Ireti was sitting beneath the neem tree, her thin back against the trunk, eyes half closed against the afternoon glare. For one impossible second, Enitan saw another afternoon superimposed over this one, his mother, younger, stronger, laughing while shelling beans and calling after a boy who kept running before finishing chores. Then the vision vanished. Reality remained. Ireti opened her eyes at the footsteps. Her gaze moved across the small group, confusion rising immediately. Why are there so many people? No one is here to harm you, Babatunde said, gentler than Enitan had expected. That more than anything told Enitan the old man already believed enough of the accusation to change his tone. Dio stepped forward quickly. Mama, they are disturbing you for nothing. Tell them you are tired. Ireti's fingers tightened in the edge of her wrapper. Enitan saw the reaction. So did Mama Bisi. And Mama Bisi, who had waited long enough, moved like a knife through soft cloth. No, she said. Today she will speak without your mouth sitting inside her words. Dio swung toward the old woman with naked fury. Stay out of this. She would have remembered peace if I had. Mama Bisi replied. Silence followed that. Heavy, shameful. Enitan took one slow step closer to his mother. Not too close, not enough to frighten her. Mama Ireti, he said softly, we need to ask you a few things. You do not need to rush. You do not need to please anyone. Just say what you remember. She looked at him longer than usual, and again that same almost recognition trembled in her eyes. Then she nodded faintly. Babatunde crouched down a little to lessen the authority in his height. Did letters ever come to this house from your older son? At once Dio interrupted. She doesn't even know what day. Quiet, Babatunde snapped. It worked. Briefly. Ireti frowned. Letters? Yes, Enitan said gently. Paper, envelopes, news from far away. Her fingers lifted and hovered in the air, as if they were touching something no one else could see. There was blue ink, she whispered. I used to keep. Her breathing changed. Dio stepped forward. You see, she is confused. The church deacon spoke for the first time. And yet you fear confusion more than truth. Dio went still. Ireti pressed her hand to her head. No, there was a box. She looked around helplessly. A tin box. Enitan's heart slammed once against his ribs. Mama Bisi's gaze met his for a fraction. She remembered, too. What happened to the box, Enitan asked. Ireti's eyes clouded. I don't know. Dio exhaled too quickly. Almost a laugh. Almost relief. Then Ireti startled at some private sound in memory and blurted. He said I had misplaced it. Every face turned. He who Babatunde asked. She looked from one person to another, suddenly frightened by their attention. I don't know. I don't know. Dio seized it. Enough. She is distressed. He moved as if to guide her inside, but Enitan stepped into his path. Not aggressively. Immovably. Not yet. Their eyes locked. What Dio saw in Enitan then was not city polish, not grief, not even anger. It was certainty. The kind that made liars sweat because it suggested the next truth was already on its way. And it was. Mama Bisi reached into the fold of her wrapper. I did not want to bring this unless forced, she said. Everyone watched as she produced a small, worn book wrapped in cloth. Ireti gasped. Not loudly, but enough. It's mine, she whispered. Enitan's chest tightened. What is it? Mama Bisi unwrapped the cloth with careful fingers. Inside was an old Bible edges, softened by years, the leather cracked and darkened by sweat and use. The sort of book poor families owned longer than furniture. Enitan recognized it immediately. His mother used to keep pressed leaves between the pages and tuck emergency notes into the back cover, because no thief bothered with scripture. Dio's face changed. Not panic. Worse. Recognition. Pure recognition. Where did you get that? He demanded. I hid it, Mama Bisi said. The day I realized this house had begun swallowing truth. She handed the Bible not to Enitan, but to Baba Tunde, who opened it with the grave attention of a man approaching evidence and sacrilege at the same time. Inside, tucked between the Book of Psalms and Proverbs, was a folded scrap of paper. Baba Tunde unfolded it carefully. The writing was uneven, shaky, but unmistakably personal. He glanced at Ireti. Did you write this? Her lips parted. Her eyes filled. I think... Baba Tunde began to read aloud. Today they told me my son is dead. Yesterday they told me he forgot us. Last month they said he sent no money. But I remember his promise under the tree. I remember his voice. If I forget, let God remember for me. Something is wrong in this house, and I am afraid I am being made to doubt what I know. The words struck the yard like thunder. No one moved. No one seemed able to. Enitan stared at the paper as if it were a wound opening in daylight. All at once the private loneliness of the last 10 years changed shape in his mind. His mother had not merely suffered. She had resisted. She had known something was wrong. She had written it down while she still could, trying to leave a breadcrumb trail back to herself before the fog fully closed. Dio found his voice first. She wrote nonsense when she was upset, he snapped. Anyone can see that. Mama Bisi turned on him with more fire than Enitan had yet seen in her. Nonsense does not hide itself inside a Bible boy. Nonsense is spoken loudly. Truth is the thing people hide when no one wants to hear it. The young post-runner swallowed hard and said, I remember one envelope. She asked me if I was sure it was for this compound. Dio took it before she could open it. The deacon added, and I remember praying here one evening 3 years ago. Mama Ireti asked whether grief could make a person hear opposite truths every day. I thought she meant sorrow. Now I wonder. Each memory was small alone. Together they became structure. Baba Tunde read the note again silently, his mouth hardening line by line. Then he looked at Dio. Did you tell her the son was dead? Did you tell her the son abandoned her? No. Did you control letters and money that came to this house? I managed what she could not. The outburst came too quickly, too defensively. And he knew it the second it landed. Because managed was not denial. It was admission dressed in righteousness. Baba Tunde's stare sharpened. So you did control them? Dio's eyes darted. For the family, Enitan spoke then, and his voice was so quiet the others leaned in to hear. You did not only steal from her, he said. You made her question whether love had ever reached her. Dio looked at him with something raw and ugly. "You left," he hissed. "You got to leave. You think money absolves distance. You think success erases the years I was here, carrying her sickness, her crying, her needs. You think I watched all those envelopes come and did not know what they meant. They meant I would never matter while you existed." There it was, the truth beneath the theft. Not hunger first, not desperation first. Envy. An envy so old and deep it had chosen to wound their mother in order to reach the brother. Ireti made a sound, then a small broken sound that drew every eye back to her. She was staring at Dio as if seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "You said—" Her lips trembled. "You said he was gone." Dio turned toward her, instantly trying to regain control. "Mama, listen to me." "No." The word came from her weak throat with surprising force. "You said he was gone." Her hand rose shakily to her chest. "Then you said he was alive, but ashamed. Then you said I forgot. You said I forgot." Tears spilled over her cheeks. Enitan's own vision blurred, because this was the cruelest part of all. Not merely that her memory had been tampered with, that she had been forced to distrust her own love, forced to live inside contradiction until her mind grew exhausted enough to surrender. He knelt before her, unable to stop himself now. "Mama," he said softly. She looked at him through tears and confusion. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried to remember properly." The sentence broke something inside him, not loudly, quietly, completely. He bowed his head once, then lifted it again with wet eyes and a steadier voice than he felt. "You did," he said. "You did remember. They just kept hurting the memory." The yard was silent except for Ireti's quiet weeping. Babatunde folded the note with reverence and disgust mixed together. When he spoke, his voice carried finality. "This matter has moved beyond rumor." He looked at Dio, and beyond family misunderstanding. Dio stood very still, but the structure around him was collapsing. Enitan could see it happening in real time, the loss of narrative, the loss of moral, cover the loss of villagers' hesitation. The note from the Bible had done what evidence often failed to do. It had given suffering its own voice, and Enitan, kneeling before his crying mother, understood the deepest truth of all. She had never truly forgotten him. She had been forced to get lost trying to hold on to him. No one rushed to fill the silence after Babatunde spoke. It was the kind of silence that came only when a lie had finally lost its shelter, and everyone present understood that whatever happened next would change the shape of the village for years. Ireti sat beneath the neem tree, tears moving slowly through the lines of her face. Enitan remained kneeling before her, one hand half raised, as though afraid that touching her too suddenly might break the fragile thread now forming between memory and pain. Dio stood 3 paces away, breathing hard. His eyes kept moving, not wildly but sharply, measuring exits, faces, alliances. Enitan recognized that look. It was not guilt alone. It was calculation under pressure. The mind of a man searching for the smallest remaining gap in a wall that had nearly closed around him. And that was exactly why Enitan did not stand up immediately. He let the moment belong to his mother first. "Mama," he said softly, "look at me." Ireti's gaze lifted with effort. Not all the way, not cleanly, but enough. He swallowed past the ache in his throat. "You are not crazy. You are not wicked. And you did not fail because you struggled to remember." Her lips trembled. "Then why does everything in my head feel like broken plates?" The question struck every person in the yard differently. The old women lowered their eyes. The deacon inhaled sharply. Babatunde's mouth hardened. But for Enitan it landed like a wound with his name buried inside it. Because if he had come sooner, he cut the thought off. Too late, too useful to guilt. Guilt could come after justice, not before. He shifted closer and answered with all the steadiness he could gather. Because someone kept dropping lies into your mind until even truth sounded loud and dangerous. Ireti's eyes glistened. Her gaze drifted confused again, then returned. You speak like... She stopped. Like what? Like whom Enitan did not press. Not yet. Behind him, Dio found his voice. She is emotional, he said. That note proves nothing. People write fears when they are sick. Everyone here knows grief affected her mind long before any of this. Babatunde turned toward him slowly. And yet grief somehow always spoke in your favor. Dio's jaw flexed. Because I was the one here. The words cracked through the yard. At once Enitan rose, not violently, but with a quiet authority that changed the air around him. He had held himself back long enough. The son in him had bled. Now the man who knew how to end a false narrative had to step forward. Yes, he said, you were here. Dio said nothing. So let us talk about what you did with being here. Enitan reached into the leather folder tucked under his arm and removed document after document, laying them one by one on the old wooden stool beside the tree. Each sheet was deliberate, each one chosen not for quantity but for the order in which it would destroy denial. Here are transfer confirmations from my accounts over the past 10 years, he said. Not everyone. Only enough to establish pattern. Babatunde took the first set and scanned it. His eyes widened, then narrowed. He passed them to the deacon, then to one of the older women. Here Enitan continued placing down the second stack are 2 district registry loan documents signed in my mother's name. Both linked to land use and debt collection. Both filed while she was supposedly too confused to manage basic affairs. Dio stepped forward. I borrowed to keep this household standing. Enitan looked at him. Then show where the money went. Dio opened his mouth, but no answer came. Show repairs equal to the debt, Enitan said. Show harvests improved by it. Show medical records matching the amounts. Show food. Show livestock. Show anything besides your motorbike, your hidden locks, and a house that still looks like neglect wearing a headscarf. The blow landed. Said, who had drifted close enough to hear, despite being told this was no longer for the whole village, muttered God help us beneath her breath. Enitan laid down Dr. Amina's report last. And here he said, voice flattening with controlled fury, is the physician's finding that my mother's confusion was made worse by unsafe medication, fear malnutrition, and prolonged psychological distress. Ireti looked from paper to paper as though they were objects from another planet. Dio laughed suddenly. Not because anything was funny, because some men laughed when the cliff edge reached their heels. So this is it, he said. You return rich wave papers and expect everyone to kneel because you learned how cities dress cruelty in English. Enitan's stare did not shift. No, I expect truth to survive your mouth. Dio's face twisted. Good, Enitan thought. Let the mask tear now, in front of witnesses, in front of the woman he had hidden behind for years. Tell them, Dio snapped, pointing at the villagers. Tell them how easy it was for you to disappear and build a grand life while we counted rain seasons here like prisoners. Tell them how your mother called your name on nights when fever took her, and there was no one to buy medicine except me. Tell them how the whole village praised your promise, your promise, your promise, while I carried the body of what was left behind. There it was again. Not innocence, resentment. Old, starving resentment fed until it had become moral self-worship. Enitan took one slow step toward him. You want sacrifice recognized, he asked quietly. Then let us recognize it accurately. You fed her enough to survive, not enough to recover. You medicated her enough to obey, not enough to heal. You kept her alive in the narrow way a jailer keeps a prisoner alive, just enough for the cell to remain occupied." The old women gasped. Dio lunged forward half a step. "Watch your mouth," no, Enitan said, and the single word came out sharp enough to stop him. "You watched my mother disappear and called it duty." The yard went still again. Ireti's hands shook in her lap. She was looking between the two men as if trying to fit them into one shattered frame. Then she whispered, "Stop!" Both of them turned. Her eyes were on Dio, not Enitan. On Dio. "You said," she murmured, voice broken but gaining force, "you said he had forgotten me." She swallowed hard. "Then you said God was teaching me not to cling to people who rise and never look back." No one moved. Dio's face drained. Ireti pressed her fingers to her forehead, wincing through the effort of memory. "Then when money came, you said it was church help. Then when letters came—" She faltered, then suddenly looked frightened. "Did letters come?" Enitan's breath caught. Mama Bisi stepped closer, gentler now. "Yes, sister. Letters came." Ireti gave a tiny, wounded sound. "I thought I saw blue envelopes." "You did," Mama Bisi said. For a second, the older woman's confirmation seemed to anchor something inside Ireti. Her breathing deepened. Not calm, but more focused. And Enitan saw it, the terrible miracle Dr. Amina had hinted at. Remove some fear. Bring truth into daylight. Let the mind stop struggling alone. And memory, even damaged memory, could begin to turn toward home. He took out one final item. An envelope. Old, yellowed, opened at the top but never unfolded again after he had retrieved it the previous evening from behind a loose board in the hut's back storage area while Dio had been distracted. He had recognized his own handwriting instantly and nearly gone blind with rage. Now he held it up for all to see. "My mother's name," he said. Then he turned it over. "My hand." Ireti stared. Dio looked like he had been struck. Babatunde stepped forward. "Where did you get that?" "From the house," Enitan answered, without taking his eyes off Dio. Hidden, not discarded. Kept because he could not bear to throw away proof of his own cleverness. That landed with surgical precision. Dio's expression cracked in a way pure accusation had not achieved. Shame had finally met vanity. "Read it," Mama Bisi whispered. Enitan hesitated. He had written that letter 8 years ago in a hotel room, after closing the first deal that made his future real. He remembered every line because he had written it crying drunk on exhaustion and hope. He had told his mother he was almost ready, that he would come back soon, that the house would change, that she would never again choose between medicine and food. He unfolded it carefully. His voice was steady on the first sentence and nearly broke on the second. "Mama, forgive the years. I am working so hard because I want the next time you see me to be the last season you ever spend in want." Ireti made a sound. Small, sharp, almost a gasp. Enitan kept reading. Not the whole letter. Only enough. Enough for the yard to hear the love in it. Enough for them to hear the specificity no fraud could invent. The childhood memory of her maize porridge on storm nights. The promise about the roof. The line about buying her sandals that did not cut her heels. The way he signed it not as Enitan Afolayan, not as a businessman, but as your stubborn son, who still hears your voice whenever he is tired. When he finished, no one spoke. Ireti was crying openly now, not with the blank, helpless tears of confusion, but with the grief of recognition trying to break through fog. "Stubborn," she whispered. Enitan looked up. She raised a trembling hand toward his face, but stopped halfway as though afraid reality might move if she touched it. "You used to say—" Her mouth quivered. "You used to say you would wear city shoes and still come home with village dust on them." Tears hit him before he could stop them. "Yes," he said. Her hand reached him at last. just the side of his cheek. Light, disbelieving. The entire yard held its breath. "Eni," she whispered. Not the full name, but not nothing. Never nothing. Dio made a strangled noise, whether from anger or fear or the final understanding that the center was no longer holding Enitan could not tell. He turned toward him once more. "This is your last chance," Enitan said, voice rough but deadly calm. "Tell the truth before the truth is carried without you." Dio's chest rose and fell. He looked at the papers, at the letter, at the faces now stripped of sympathy, at Ireti's hand still resting on Enitan's cheek. And for the first time since Enitan had returned, Dio looked small. Not poor, not burdened. Small. Because the story he had built around himself, the loyal son, the necessary son, the wronged son, had finally been forced to stand next to evidence, next to memory, next to love, made visible, and it could not survive the comparison. Dio did not confess. Not immediately. For a few long seconds he simply stood there, with the expression of a man listening to a building collapse from inside it. The market witnesses had thinned, but enough people still hovered near the compound gate to sense that the center of the storm had shifted again. In the yard under the neem tree, the air felt charged, too thin for lies, too heavy for escape. Ireti's hand remained against Enitan's cheek. That hand changed everything. Not because it proved her memory had fully returned. It had not. The fog was still there, still drifting in and out behind her eyes. But the touch was instinctive, tender, certain in the way the body sometimes remembers before the mind dares to do the same. Enitan did not move. He was afraid that even breathing too hard might break the moment. "You said city shoes?" Ireti whispered again, as though testing the shape of memory on her tongue. And dust. A tear slipped down Enitan's face. He did not wipe it away. "Yes, Mama." The word came more naturally now, less like a wound, more like a home he was standing outside, waiting to be invited into. Ireti's brows drew together with effort. "Under the tree," she murmured. Every muscle in his body went still. There had been a tree. Not this neem tree, but the old Iroko tree at the far edge of the family's former plot. The one struck by lightning the year after he left. He had been 16, all hunger and impossible pride, swearing to his mother that he would not remain poor forever. She had laughed at his fury, then held his face and told him ambition without love turned into ash. He had promised he would come back for her. No one else knew that conversation in full. No one. He crouched slowly in front of her, his face level with hers, and asked the question as gently as a prayer. "What tree, Mama?" Her lips parted, her eyes fluttered. For one terrifying second he thought the moment had gone again. Then she whispered, "The one where you buried your first broken sandal, because you said poverty should not have a grave in our house." A sound escaped him, half sob, half laugh, entirely broken. Mama Bisi covered her mouth. Even Babatunde lowered his gaze, because that was not a general memory, not a borrowed detail, not something fed to her by suggestion. It was theirs. Small, ridiculous, intimate, the kind of memory only real love bothered to keep. Enitan bowed his head, shoulders shaking once before he mastered himself again. "You remember?" Ireti's fingers trembled against his skin. "Pieces. Pieces are enough." But they were not enough for Dio. He knew it. Enitan knew it. Everyone in the yard knew it. A mother beginning to remember was more dangerous to him than any bank record. Dio took one step backward. Babatunde caught the movement. "Stand where you are." Something ugly flashed through Dio's face. Shame hardening into anger, anger hardening into self-defense. He was a man who had spent too many years justifying himself in private. Once those justifications failed publicly, He had only two choices left. Collapse or strike. He chose strike. "You all want a villain," he snapped. "Fine. Make me one. It will help you sleep. But none of you know what it cost to stay here while this man vanished into money and airports and polished lies." Enitan rose slowly to his feet, but he did not answer. Not yet. Dio's voice grew stronger as he spoke, feeding on its own bitterness. "You call it theft because that is easy. You call it abuse because paper from a clinic says so. But where was he when the roof leaked? Where was he when she forgot to eat? Where was he when fever took her, and she called names that were not mine? You think I enjoyed being the second son in a house full of first son ghosts?" The words struck several people uncomfortably because they contained something true enough to complicate the ugliness pain. Not innocence. Pain. And pain, when left to rot, could make monsters who still felt righteous. Enitan understood that. Maybe better than anyone there, which was why he answered without yelling. "Yes," he said quietly. "You suffered too." The yard stilled. Dio blinked, almost thrown off balance by the admission. Enitan continued, voice calm and grave. "You were the boy who stayed in the shadow of another boy's promise. You were the son people compared without mercy. You watched our father expect something larger from me and something smaller from you. You learned resentment before you learned dignity." Dio's mouth tightened. "Do not pretend to know me." "I know enough," Enitan said. "Enough to see that your pain was real." Then his voice changed. Not louder, sharper. "But pain does not excuse poisoning a mother's mind." That landed like a hammer. Dio's face twisted. "I did not poison, you fed her fear. You trapped her between contradictions until she could no longer trust herself. You intercepted love and called the emptiness duty. Whatever hurt you carried, you laid it on her." Ireti made a soft, choking sound at that, and Enitan hated himself for saying it in front of her, but hated the lie more. Dio looked at Ireti, and for a flicker of a second, something uncertain passed over his expression. Regret. Maybe. Or perhaps only the shock of seeing consequences outside himself. Then it was gone. "She would have chosen you over me every time," he muttered. No one answered, because this at last was the naked center. Not money, not land, not even power. Love measured and found unequal. Dio laughed once, hollow and bitter. "You all think I wanted her sick, I wanted fairness." Mama Bisi's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Fairness does not drug an old woman." He rounded on her. "You think life was fair to me?" "No," she said. "And that is why what you became is so shameful. Because you knew what hunger felt like, and still fed it to somebody weaker." Silence followed. He could not answer her, because the old woman had reached the place where excuses broke. Ireti began to cry again, but differently now. Not lost, not blank, grieving with awareness. "Dio," she whispered. The sound of his name in her mouth seemed to stun him more than accusation had. She looked at him through tears. "Why did you tell me opposite things?" His jaw flexed. "Why," she repeated, "did you tell me he was dead 1 week and cruel the next?" For a heartbeat, Enitan thought Dio might still lie, might twist, evade, perform confusion. Instead, perhaps because the hand on Enitan's cheek had shattered his last illusion of control, the truth slipped out crooked. "Because dead was easier for you to survive," he said. "But abandoned was easier for me." The yard froze. Dio heard himself too late. His eyes widened a fraction, but the sentence was already out, already alive, already enough. Ireti stared at him as if he had struck her in the chest. Enitan closed his eyes briefly. There it was, the confession in its ugliest, simplest form. He had chosen whichever lie made his own pain more bearable at the time. Not one lie, several, contradictory, repeated, convenient. And his mother's mind had paid the price for carrying all of them. Babatunde exhaled heavily. You admit it then. Dio looked around the yard, at the elders, at the deacon, at Mama Bisi, at Enitan, at the mother who now saw him not as protector, not as necessity, but as the mouth through which confusion had entered her life. Something in him sagged. Not repentance, not fully. Collapse. I never meant. He swallowed hard. At first I only wanted her to stop talking about him every day. No one moved. She would sit with those letters like they were food, like they were sunlight. His voice had gone strange, thick, almost detached. And every time his name entered the house, I disappeared. Do you understand I disappeared while standing right there? Tears filled Iretti's eyes again, but she did not interrupt. So I hid one letter, then another, then the money. I told myself I would explain later. I told myself I deserved something too. I told myself he had left us in the meantime, so what difference did delay make? He laughed once, disgusted with himself, but still clinging to fragments of self-pity. Then the lies needed more lies. And when she started doubting, it became easier than being measured against a ghost. Enitan looked at him for a long time. The confession did not satisfy him. It explained. It did not absolve. And somehow that made it worse, because evil born from pure malice was easier to hate cleanly. Evil born from injured smallness, from years of envy, left untreated from the cowardice of someone who chose the weaker person as the place to dump his wound, that kind of evil was messier, more human, more revolting. Ireti lifted both trembling hands to her mouth. You let me think, she whispered, unable to finish. Dio looked at the ground. I know. No, she said, and her voice broke into sudden force. You do not know. Everyone turned. The old mother sitting beneath the neem tree did not look strong. Her body was thin, her memory still frayed, her hands still shook. But in that instant something older than weakness rose through her. Not strength of muscle, strength of motherhood. The kind humiliation had not managed to kill. You do not know what it is, she said, tears spilling freely, to love a child and wake up not trusting your own mind about his face. No one spoke. Not even the wind seemed willing to interrupt. She reached blindly toward Enitan. He knelt beside her at once. Her hand found his hair, then his brow, then both sides of his face. This time she did not hesitate. She studied him with desperate concentration. Your father's forehead, she whispered. Enitan's breath hitched. My eyes, she said next, tears shaking loose. Always too much fire in them. He broke then, not decorously, not quietly. He bowed into her hands and wept like the 10 years had all decided to arrive in the same minute. And Ireti, still crying, bent toward him and said the words that turned the entire world. Enitan, she whispered. My son. The sound of his name in her full, knowing voice emptied the yard of everything else. He looked up at her, stunned, disbelieving, aching. She touched his cheek again, and this time there was no uncertainty in it at all. My son, she repeated. Behind them, someone began to sob softly. Mama Bisi, perhaps, or one of the old women. Babatunde removed his cap. The deacon lowered his head and whispered a prayer. Dio stood as though the earth beneath him had given way, because this was the one thing he had truly failed to destroy. Not the records, not the evidence, the bond, the recognition. The love that had survived confusion, medication-stolen letters, and 10 years of absence, long enough to find its way back through a mother's ruined memory. Enitan pressed his forehead to Ireti's hands. And in that moment, he understood something with painful clarity. Justice had already begun. Not when the papers came out, not when the village turned. But here, when the truth he and his mother shared proved stronger than the damage done to them, by evening the village had already chosen its version of the story. Not the polished one Dio had fed it for years. Not the easy one, where sacrifice excused everything ugly done in private. The new version moved from compound to compound, from cooking fire to cooking fire, with the force truth always carried. Once enough people had seen it with their own eyes. The son had returned. The mother had remembered. And the man who called himself her protector had been standing between them all along. But Enitan did not celebrate. Not that evening. Not the next morning. Not even when Babatunde the deacon and 2 local councilmen came to the compound to begin formal statements and inventory what property debts and documents had been handled in Ireti's name over the years. Enitan stood through all of it with a face too calm for triumph. Because justice, he was learning, did not feel clean when it arrived after 10 years of damage. It felt necessary and late. Dio did not resist once the village structure turned against him. Men like him were often brave only while protected by secrecy. Once the secrecy cracked, he seemed to shrink inside his own body. He gave up the keyring. He produced the ledger from the curtained back corner. He pointed under, questioning, to the loose floorboard beneath the bed, where 3 old envelopes, a cloth pouch with cash remnants, and a stack of folded receipts had been hidden. He even led Babatunde to a rusted biscuit tin buried behind the side wall, where more letters lay wrapped in plastic against rain. When Enitan saw the tin opened, he had to turn away. There were years inside it. His own handwriting stared back at him from envelope after envelope. Blue ink, black ink, one written from Accra, another from Nairobi, one from Johannesburg after the merger that had changed his life forever. One containing a photograph of a house design he had wanted to build for his mother. One with a birthday card. One with nothing but 3 pages of apology because he had delayed returning yet again, telling himself he needed just one more deal, 1 more year, 1 more margin of safety before bringing her into the life he wanted to give her. None of them had touched her hands. None of them had answered her waiting. He stood under the neem tree, gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. Ireti, seated nearby with Mama Bisi beside her, watched him with eyes still uncertain, at moments still drifting in and out of clarity, but now always returning to him eventually. That was enough to keep him standing. When Babatunde finished the first review of the documents, he removed his glasses, wiped them, and spoke with the tired authority of a man who hated what he had to say, but would say it anyway. "This will go beyond village discipline," he said. "There is debt fraud, property misrepresentation, financial theft. And if the doctor's written assessment stands, there is elder abuse." No one argued. Not even Dio. Not. He sat on a low stool with his head bowed, wrists loose on his knees, looking at the dirt, as though answers might still be buried there. Once, only once, he looked up at Ireti. She could not hold his gaze. The pain in her face was too raw, too bewildered, too maternal to be simple hatred. That more than any punishment seemed to hollow him out. By noon the next day, district officers had been notified through Enitan's lawyers. Statements were collected. Copies of the clinic report were made. The loan documents taken in Ireti's name were flagged for review. The piece of family land sold under compromised circumstances would require formal legal work, but Enitan had already dispatched a senior attorney from Lagos to begin the process. Everything moved quickly once money and evidence stood on the same side. And yet Enitan found no comfort in speed. His real work was sitting inside the house in a borrowed wrapper, wincing when bright light struck her eyes, still asking at times where her husband was before remembering he had died years ago. Still sometimes forgetting what day it was, but no longer forgetting who Enitan was when he entered the room. That was the miracle. Fragile, incomplete, beautiful. 3 days after the confrontation, Enitan brought Ireti to the city. Not with cameras, not with spectacle, not with the grand motor convoy his staff begged to arrange. He refused all of it. He took her in a quiet SUV with tinted windows. Mama Bisi beside them at his insistence, because he had seen the old woman calm Ireti in ways medicine could not. During the drive, his mother drifted in and out of sleep. Once she woke with a start and whispered, "Did we lock the chickens?" Enitan smiled through the pain in his chest. "There are no chickens to worry about today, Mama." She looked at him, frowned, as if checking that answer against memory, then nodded and went back to resting. The rehabilitation wing of the private hospital in Lagos had already been prepared. A nutritionist, a geriatric specialist, a neurologist, a trauma-informed therapist. Enitan paid for everything before a single form was set in front of him. Not because money solved what had happened. It did not. But because after 10 years of absence, he wanted no delay between need and care. The first weeks were difficult. Ireti's body, once fed properly and taken off the worst of the inappropriate medication, seemed to wake in stages. Some days she was more alert and embarrassed by how much help she needed. Other days she was frightened, certain she had done something wrong simply because a nurse adjusted her blankets. The apologizing remained for a while. Sorry for spilling water. Sorry for needing the toilet at night. Sorry for forgetting names. Sorry for sleeping too much. Sorry for not sleeping enough. Every apology struck Enitan like a private insult delivered by the past. So he answered each one the same way. "You don't need to apologize." At first she looked confused every time. Then slowly the confusion lessened. The doctors were honest. Some of the cognitive harm might improve significantly. Some might remain. Trauma changed the brain. Prolonged sedation and malnutrition left marks. But they also said something that mattered more to Enitan than statistics. She improved fastest when he was there. Not because of money, not because of the room, because of familiarity. Because each consistent act of safety gave her mind a reason to stop bracing for harm. So he stayed. He did not stop working entirely. His companies were too large for that, and he had spent years building systems that did not collapse if he stepped away for a week. But he rearranged board meetings, took calls from hospital corridors, signed documents beside her therapy room, read balance sheets after midnight once she was sleeping. And in between all that he did, small things no billionaire image had prepared him for. He peeled oranges for her. He rubbed lotion into her hands because the skin had grown too dry. He brought her soft slippers and laughed quietly when she inspected them like suspicious royalty before allowing them onto her feet. He read her his old letters one by one. Those letters did what evidence could not. They stitched continuity. They gave her a bridge back to the years stolen from her. Sometimes she would stop him halfway through and ask, "Was I really this loved?" And each time his throat would tighten before he answered, "Yes, Mama, more than you were allowed to know." Not every day was healing. Some days were rage. On one particularly clear morning after a therapy session, in which she successfully remembered the layout of their old compound from before his father died, Ireti sat silent for so long that Enitan thought she was tired. Then she asked, without looking at him, "What happened to Dio?" He had known the question would come eventually. "He is facing legal charges," Enitan said carefully. The village gave statements. "My lawyers are handling the financial side. The district officers are reviewing the rest." Ireti nodded slowly. "Will he go to prison?" "Possibly." She kept staring out the window. At last she whispered, "I do not know what a mother is supposed to pray for in such a situation." Enitan had no easy answer, no righteous slogan, no clean moral line. That was the trouble with family betrayal. Justice could be necessary and still feel like grief. So he told her the truth. "You do not have to pray him innocent," he said softly. "And you do not have to pray him destroyed. Maybe pray that what was crooked in him is finally forced to face itself." She turned that over in silence. Then, to his surprise, she reached for his hand. "You sound like your father when he was most disappointed," she said. That almost made him laugh. A month later, after legal orders had frozen the fraudulent debt claims and begun the process of restoring the remaining land under proper protection, Enitan returned with Ireti to the village for one day. Just one. He had rebuilt nothing yet. Deliberately. He did not want to erase history too quickly with concrete and paint. First, he wanted his mother to stand inside truth without fear. The old hut was still there, but already emptier. The hidden letters had been removed, the sedatives taken away. Dio's motorbike gone under seizure, the back storage area unlocked, light entering places that had been guarded too closely. Ireti stood at the doorway in a clean cream wrapper, leaning lightly on Enitan's arm. The village watched from a respectful distance. She stepped inside, looked around, breathed once, then turned to Enitan and said in a clear voice, untouched by confusion for that one shining moment, "This house held pain, but it will not hold my ending." He swallowed hard. "No, Mama. It won't." He kept the land, not for the hut, for memory. Within months, a modest but beautiful new home rose on the safer side of the family property. Sunlit area with a wide veranda, a garden, and a room for Mama Bisi, who refused at first and then cried when Ireti insisted. Beside it, using his own funds, but under a village trust, Enitan built a small care center for abandoned and vulnerable elders. Not a grand monument, something practical. Clean beds, medical checks, meals, counseling access, legal aid visits twice a month. When the opening day came, the villagers expected a speech about charity. Enitan gave them something else. No amount of money, he said, standing beside his mother in the morning sun, can return the exact years that cruelty stole. But money can decide whether pain multiplies or stops here. What happened in one house should never happen again in silence. People listened, really listened. And beside him, Ireti stood straighter than she had. Later that afternoon, after the visitors left and the new veranda fell quiet, Enitan found her sitting in a woven chair facing the garden. The light was warm. Birds moved in the hibiscus. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed. He walked toward her softly. He turned before he spoke. No confusion, no searching. No polite stranger's smile. Just recognition, calm, cold. Enitan. She said the name, resting naturally in her mouth now. "Come and sit by me, my son." He stopped for 1 second because the beauty of ordinary recognition was still too much. Then he sat. She took his hand. And under the gold of the late afternoon in the home, truth had built after lies had nearly destroyed them. Enitan finally allowed himself to feel what had been waiting beneath all the grief, fury, and battle. Not victory, peace, because justice had done its work, and love, wounded but undefeated, had done the rest.